You know, entrepreneurship is about theory and practice. And what we heard today is an enormous amount of practice. And so what I'm going to give you is a little bit of the theory. And I just want you to remember that, you know, reading all the books in the world and going to all the conferences and reading my stuff and Eric's stuff, at the end of the day, the ratio should be about 100 to 1 of practice to theory. It's not about reading it, as you all know, or for those of you who have been doing it, it's about doing it. But because I'm now an educator, in this talk, I'm going to talk a little bit about entrepreneurial education and maybe a little bit about what we've learned in the last year about teaching entrepreneurship and also about some new insights on the business model canvas. So the first thing I want to just tell you is some of the things we used to believe and some of the things we now know. We used to believe that entrepreneurship can't be taught. Oh, all the entrepreneurs are born and, you know, this is it and you can't learn anything. You either got the DNA or not. And I struggled with this because I guess I was trying to teach entrepreneurship and realized that we were actually framing the question wrong. It was an incorrect frame. It wasn't, can entrepreneurship be taught or not? The real question was, who can it be taught to? And I think what we now know is entrepreneurship can now be taught to those who volunteer. None of you have been drafted. All of you are certifiably insane, right? I mean, why else would you do something that we know that 90% of you will fail? We also know that in a room like this, and the sum of all the people watching on live casts, there's probably in a room like this several of you who are going to make $100 million. Look around. Look around. You should all look around. Who's that going to be? Now, the good news is that those people exist in the room. The bad news is, if you were looking for them, you shouldn't be an entrepreneur. Because you ought to go work for them. Some of you can explain it to some of the others. And then you should really go get a job for those guys. All of you have volunteered. What we used to believe is entrepreneurship education takes years in school. You need an MBA, or gee, you got to go to Stanford in the engineering school, and gee, you need to know all these things. But what we now really know is that entrepreneurship education, as I said earlier, is a little theory and a lot practice. And, you know, let me show you, we've actually been able to take photographs of what real-world entrepreneurial education looks like. I captured this photo of what it looks like outside the building. So if you want to look and see, this is what the entrepreneurial process looks like in the real world. And it's kind of hard to teach chaos, you know, in like step 1, you know, chaos, and step 2, chaos. You really got to experience it. You know, entrepreneurship education is like the priest teaching you sex, right? It's kind of like, you know, because most, you know, educators have not really done this for a couple years. And so while the theory is great, thank you, some of you could explain that to each other as well. The other thing we used to believe is, you know, all I need is the 5-year forecast. Now, I got to tell you, what's great about, you know, having time to think, being a retired entrepreneur is, you know, we took for granted that this goes in the back of the business plan. It's Appendix A. You know, depending on the type of alcohol or drugs you've had, it gets to be more and more fantastic when you do your forecast. But no one ever observed that the only people who required 5-year plans were the VCs in Soviet Union. Okay? And we know how well that turned out. And I think for both, it will turn out the exact same way. What we now also know, and here's kind of one of the points of the presentation, besides the comedy routine, is we now know how to make startups fail less. And while there are different variations of lean and how to do this, I'm just going to share with you my observation of the 3 pieces that we now understand that, to me, kind of add up to an entrepreneurial API. That is, I now have concluded, at least as an educator, there's a minimum standard worldwide that we all need to understand. And again, translated into your version, but I think we need to know three things. One is, part one, we need to know what a business model is. Whether it's, Alexander Osterwalder's or Ash's, it doesn't matter, but you now need to be thinking about business models. Haven't any of you seen Osterwalder's business model canvas? Anybody? So we'll be talking about some of the new findings here in a second. But the second piece is we need some out-of-the-building process to test the hypotheses in our business model. So the second thing every entrepreneur worldwide needs to talk about is business model canvas or some business model, hypothesis, and some testing process for those hypotheses. And then the third piece we now understand we need to know is some type of iterative and incremental engineering process, right, to actually build the product. Yeah. Well, wait a minute. Who are you? You're interrupting my presentation. I was about to describe the business model canvas in detail. Who are you? Well, wait a minute. Wait a minute. No, I'm in the middle of a presentation, Alexander. What are you going to do?
Well, there's something new that I'd like to show you.
Wait a minute. This is my presentation. Really? You want to add some value here?
It will help them.
Okay. Well, why don't you do it, Alexander Osterwald?
Okay. So we figured out that something's missing in this equation, my team and myself, so we tried to go a little bit into that third part, agile engineering, and add something to it. Because I think what we have until now is great, and we learned a lot along the way, but there's something we could add. So if you look at what we tried to do at the beginning when we came up with the business model canvas, it was to try to find a roadmap, some kind of tool that would help us ask the right questions and test the right thing. Because if you just go out there and test, you probably won't go very far. So we came up with a business model canvas that many of you know. I've seen that. So what about when it comes to products and value propositions? Right? We can build, measure, and learn, which is great, and which we have to do. And I think the ratio that Steve talked about is absolutely crucial. But what if we could have a roadmap before that would help us think before we build? So we came up with something that helps you with the product market fit. So if you have a customer segment over there in the business model canvas and you have a value proposition in the middle, well, you want to figure out how can you create some kind of match, a real fit between them, right? So my team and me thought, what if we could create a concept to map out this product market fit, kind of a roadmap to build, measure, and learn, and to ask the right questions. So let's look at the customer there. Let's take a customer segment, and we'll look at three things. A bit agitated, my customer up there. So, whoops. We need to look at three things. So first one is, somewhere, the jobs that customers are trying to get done. What are they trying to achieve? And this is a concept that comes from Clayton Christensen and Tony Ulwick, and they say, well, we hire products to do things for us. We hire products to do things for us. And we need to figure out, well, what are customers hiring our products for? So Clay, he quotes, where do I have to point this so the slides advance? I don't know. This is an MVP, I think. So Clay quotes a Harvard professor who's passed away, Ted Levitt. And he says people don't buy a quarter-inch drill, they want a quarter-inch hole. And you've probably seen this again and again. Now, wouldn't it be cool if we could think about this a little bit more in a systematic way? So we need to look at the jobs that customers are trying to get done. So that's the first concept we're going to look at. But once we figured out what customers are trying to get done, we need to ask ourselves and map this out before we actually go talk to customers. Well, what could their biggest pains be? So if you're selling software to a CIO, Chief Information Officer, well, what are the biggest pains? Total cost of ownership, maintenance, learning curve, and so on. So figure out what the biggest pain points are. And then you need to figure out, what do customers expect? What do they think should the outcomes of those jobs be? What do they want? So most of us know that one of the gain of a tool like this, a phone, is, okay, you want to make a call. That's a minimum gain. Well, today, nobody would put a BlackBerry on a table anymore because that hurts our eyes. It's unfair to everybody else in the room. So the gains, I think VCs are the last ones who are really doing that. So the gains are the outcomes that we would like to have, that we expect, that might go beyond what we really want. So that's the customer part. You map it out, and then you go and test. Now let's look at the left-hand side here, where we're going to look at the value proposition. Wonderful value proposition there. We're going to map out 3 things to get to the product market fit. 3 things. First one is just a list of the products and services that you're offering. Okay, Apple with the iPod has a device, as a product, the content, the music, movies, and the service would be iTunes and the iTunes Store. So you just make a list. But then you need to explain, how do these products and services really create value? So you're going to look at first the painkillers. How do your products and services kill pains? So see here how we're getting closer to product market fit? We have a beautiful map, which will help us do something before we build. To think it through, but then build and learn very quickly and iterate through this, okay? And then the gain creators. So here you have a wonderful map, a second map, that helps you with the agile engineering, okay? Now the important thing is that you have both maps. The business model and the value proposition, because a great value proposition is not enough. The great business model will be the difference between somebody who has failed and somebody who has become a billionaire, okay? So you need both, right? One doesn't exist without the other. Now, of course, what Steve said, we need to test this. So your first business model canvas will fail. You make a new one, will fail. You make a new one, will fail until you found the right one. So now we have a tool to do the same thing for value propositions. Map out our value proposition, fail, change, until we got it. And at the end of the day, we want to have this equation, and then we'll create great business models. And here I'll hand over to Steve again. Thanks a lot for giving me some time. Was it worthwhile?
So, thank you, Alexander.
My pleasure.
So, anybody else want to come up and finish my presentation for me? We seem to be doing crowdsourcing as I run out of slides. But as I was saying, this entrepreneurial API, these 3 things I think entrepreneurs need to learn, we need to teach. And we need to teach it not one class at a time at Stanford and Berkeley and Columbia and Caltech, and that's kind of fun, and I enjoy doing that. But we need to figure out how to do it en masse. And I set a goal this year of, I'd like to create in the next couple of years 10,000 startups. Why? Because it's a nice number, and I like the ring of Dave McClure's thing. In 500 startups, 10,000 startups. You know, what the heck, right? And if we only do 4,993, none of you will be counting. But the goal is, as Eric and I've been saying, and the phrase has now kind of become meaningful, we want to democratize entrepreneurship so it's not just the Silicon Valley, Sand Hill Road, you got to come to Palo Alto to learn how to do this stuff. We believe that this could be taught and could be practiced everywhere in the world. And so how are we going to do this? So the first step was to put the class online. That is, the class that teaches Alexander's Business Model Canvas, customer development, agile engineering. Some of you might know there's a free class. It's the class I teach for the National Science Foundation in Stanford and Berkeley and Columbia, online for free on udacity.com. Today, there are 60,000 people taking the class. 60,000. The second thing is, you could get that class online, but you really don't get any mentoring or coaching or critiques, and it's not really a team thing. So, yeah, it's kind of nice to have the lectures, but you know, it's kind of like getting an audio book of entrepreneurship. And, well, that's kind of interesting. Entrepreneurship is a hands-on practitioner skill. How do we teach that? Well, one of the things I decided was I really want to figure out how to get thousands of these classes thousands, being taught around the world. So I ended up somewhere. Can somebody manually advance the slide? Batteries? Ah, there we go. So I ended up, can I go back? There? All right, stop. So I ended up partnering with an organization called Startup Weekend. Anybody ever run into the Startup Weekend? If you haven't, it's a nonprofit. They've done 1,000 events. 1,000 events. They teach a weekend event, 54 hours, how to come in with an idea and leave with a team that's gotten out of the building and gotten their hands on. They've put it on in over 100 countries. They've taught over 100,000 entrepreneurs. It's the world's largest entrepreneurial education group. And what we decided to do was to extend the Startup Weekend curriculum with a series of partners, Udacity, Startup America, Techstars, and thousands of facilitators and coaches, and have a 3-week course called Startup Weekend Next. It's a 3-week hands-on course. It's the same curriculum that I teach, again, for Stanford, Berkeley, Columbia, and National Science Foundation. We've taught the first 25 teams so far this year. We'll do about 125 in the first quarter, and hopefully we'll be doing hundreds, if not 1,000 locations in 2013. And over the next couple of years, our goal is to create 10,000 startups. So if you're interested, the class is Startup Weekend Next. Go take a look at startupweekendnext.co, and we'll see you in class. Thank you very much.